I also want to recognize that it is extremely difficult to maintain the hope that that is possible, especially as we watch a genocide live streamed for over a year. And we see the climate crisis escalating across the world, and we see the continued rise of divisive, racist, far-right policies across the world. And as we meet here today, and online, welcome to people who are online, the UN Climate Summit, COP29, has just come to an end in Baku, Azerbaijan, this morning. Azerbaijan, who continue to be Israel's largest oil supplier, have been proclaiming that these negotiations have been the COP of peace. This COP was meant to be about climate finance, or more accurately, the climate debt that wealthier nations owe those in predominantly the global south that are the least responsible for the climate crisis, but are facing the harshest impacts. Negotiators did finalize a deal this morning, but it falls far, far below what is needed. I'd like to open this event today with a quote from Abia Butma, who was representing our sister organization, Friends of the Earth Palestine, at COP29. And she said, "It's infuriating to hear rich countries claim there is no money to repay the climate debt owed to the global south, whilst pouring billions into the genocide in Palestine. More than empty promises and expressions of solidarity, we need accountability and action to deliver both climate justice and justice for Palestinians." Once again, COP has reminded us, for the 29th time, that no one is coming to save us, and it's the power of people, the millions of us around the world, fighting for what we know is right that can make change. So I'm very grateful to be here with you all today, to reading that depressing news this morning. And I'm very grateful to be able to introduce this amazing panel. So we have with us, very happy to welcome Hamza Hamidjini, who is the North African Coordinator for the Transnational Institute and the co-editor of Dismantling Green Colonialism, Energy and Climate Justice in the Arab Region. And we have some copies at the back that can be signed later. We also have Manal Shakir, who is a Palestinian climate justice activist and a contributor to the book Dismantling Green Colonialism. Freya Aitchison, who is the Oil and Gas Activism Officer at Friends of the Earth Scotland. You can tell we're colleagues because we're dressed the same. And Sophia McLeod, who's part of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Stop the JNF campaign. And today we're going to hear from all of our speakers. There'll be a little bit of time for questions. There'll be a short break at 4:30, and then we're going to hear from the Sangani Choir, some songs in Arabic that they want to share with you. And then there'll be a bit of time for discussion with each other, and we have some stalls at the back that have actions you can take, as well as the books that you can sign. So, yeah, I hope that you stay with us for the next couple of hours this afternoon as we explore these topics together. There's also just housekeeping. There's some toilets to the left. Please look after yourself, go outside if you need to. And if there's no scheduled fire alarm, if an alarm does go off, please make your way outside through the doors directly behind or just to the left, and we'll go to the right and gather just there. But without further ado, to start exploring some of these topics, I'll pass to Hamza, who's going to talk a bit about his book and kind of the way that these topics intersect, and maybe the same.
Thank you for the kind introductions. Thanks for all the organizers, Friends of the Earth Scotland, Scotland Palestine Solidarity Campaign, for organizing and hosting this important conversation. I'm going to try to share a few thoughts and reflections and threads that link the climate crisis with imperialism and Palestinian liberation. So at the Climate Summit COP28 last year, held in Dubai, the Colombian President Petro said, "Genocide and barbaric acts unleashed against the Palestinian people is what await those who are fleeing the south because of the climate crisis. What we see in Gaza is the rehearsal of the future. I think he is absolutely right. The genocide in Gaza is a harbinger of worse things to come if we don't organize and fight back vigorously. The global ruling classes and the empire are willing to sacrifice millions of black and brown people as well as poor white working class people so they can continue accumulating capital and amassing wealth and maintaining their domination. You mentioned the quote from Abir, whom I met actually in Baku a few days ago. This is exactly what the global ruling classes are doing. They are willing to fund genocides and wars everywhere to take us into the abyss and destruction, but they do not want to put those billions into climate action. This is related to the system we live under, the capitalist system, which has been always a system of unpaid costs. The costs are systematically externalized and shifted somewhere else. Shifted through social reproduction to women and carers, that work is largely unpaid or underpaid, shifted from urban to rural areas, shifted also from the global north to the south, where sacrifice zones are created, and of course this is facilitated through dehumanizing, othering, and racializing mechanisms. But also the capitalist system externalizes the costs to nature, because it treats it, it has been treating it for centuries as an entity to dominate, plunder, if not to commodify, and also as a sink to throw the waste and all that stuff. This is the basis of the ecological and climate crisis that we are going through. So this global climate crisis that we are seeing escalating and worsening by the day in various parts of the world, its outlooks and impacts are differentiated through class, through race, through gender, through rural urban areas, but also north, the cores and the centers of empire versus the peripheries and the global south, but also distinguishable through colonizer and colonized lines. And the case of Palestine is very, very revealing here. Palestinians and Israelis inhabit the same terrain, but there is a huge disparity in impact and vulnerability because Israeli settler colonialism has grabbed and is controlling most resources from land to water to energy and has developed on the back of Palestinians and with the active support of the imperialist powers, the technology that will help it relieve some of the impacts of the climate crisis. And in here, we need to know that the East Med would be one of the worst impacted regions in terms of climate crisis. And the question of water is key here. There is water apartheid in Palestine right now. Most of the resources are controlled by Israeli and Israeli settlers, while the Palestinians have the lowest per capita availability in terms of water in the world. So it may feel misplaced or even not correct to talk about the climate and ecological crisis in the context of the genocide in Gaza, but I would argue that there are really important intersections between the climate crisis and the liberation of Palestine. In fact, I would say that there will be no climate justice at a global stage without the liberation of Palestine. And the Palestinian struggle is also a struggle to save the earth and humanity. This is not sloganeering, and I will explain. First of all, Palestine today demonstrates perfectly the ugliness of the current system and show that it is moving towards the usage of more cruel and untold outright violence at a larger scale. The Italian Marxist Gramsci once said, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born." In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Second, what we are seeing in Palestine is not a genocide. Words fail to describe the horror and the untold destruction that we are seeing. A lot of analysts and scholars have been trying to scramble for certain concepts and terminology to describe what is happening, from herbicide to domicide to epistemicide to scholasticide and also to ecocide. Because what we are also seeing is an ecocide, destructions of environments, destruction of agricultural land, contamination of water and earth, and so forth. But I think it's much more appropriate to call what is happening a holocide, which means the annihilation of an entire social and ecological fabric of life itself. And this comes on the top of decades of environmental warfare, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and other parts of the Middle East, like in Lebanon. And I'm sure you've been reading about some shocking statistics in terms of the emergence of even eradicated diseases right now in Palestine, and what the UN said about clearing all the piled rubble. It says it would take up to 15 years to clear around 40 million tons of rubble. My third point is that the genocidal war in Gaza, as well as other wars in other parts of the world, like in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Yemen, and also highlight and Sudan, also highlight the role of war and the military-industrial complex in exacerbating the ecological and climate crisis. This intersection is under-analyzed and under-scrutinized, and I think we need to put the military-industrial complex in its responsibility and make it accountable. The US Army on its own is the single largest institutional emitter in the world. It emits more than Western countries like Denmark and Portugal. And in the first 2 months of the genocidal war in Gaza, the emissions from Israel were, just in 2 months, were superior to the annual emissions of more than 20 vulnerable countries on the planet. And half of those emissions are due to the shipping of weaponries by the United States, which indicates and points to the active participation and complicity of the United States in the genocide and ecocide. My main argument, and this is my fourth point, which is based on the work of Adam Hania and Andreas Malm, is that we cannot dissociate the struggle against global fossil capitalism and US-led imperialism from the struggle to liberate Palestine. And I'll tell you why. First of all, the Middle East, especially the Gulf countries, they play an important role in the global capitalist economy. It's not just that they mediate various networks of trade, shipping, logistics, finance, and banking, but also the Middle East, especially the Gulf countries, are a key nodal point in keeping global fossil capital intact. They are really central. The region remains at the center of the global fossil fuel markets. 35% of the oil produced comes from that region. And for the US to dominate that region and to dominate global fossil capitalism, it has two key pillars of domination. The first one is Israel. Israel, as a Euro-American settler colony in the Middle East, is an imperial advanced outpost. Alexander Haig, the US Secretary of State under Richard Nixon, once put it bluntly: Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, does not even have one American soldier, and is located in a critical region for American national security. So Israel is the #1 ally in the region, and plays a fundamental role in maintaining the domination of the US-led empire over the region and control of its vast fuel resources, mainly in the Gulf and Iraq. The second pillar of US hegemony in the region and globally are the reactionary oil-rich Gulf monarchies, especially Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Bahrain. And the US and its allies have been doing everything that they could to bring these two pillars or poles together through normalization deals. We had Jordan and Egypt normalizing back to the 70s and 90s, but we've seen lately in 2020 with the Abraham Accords, the normalization between Israel and Bahrain, Emirates, Sudan, and Morocco. And that part, the agenda of normalization and bringing those regimes closer together, is an agenda of integrating Israel in the region from a dominant position, offering technology, weaponry, surveillance, material, but also water desalination, agribusiness, and energy. And I believe that Manal would talk a little bit about this. So the rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia was being concretized and actually would have cemented the US-led fossil empire and would have liquidated the Palestinian cause. Hamas, as an integral part of Palestinian resistance to colonialism and US imperialism, disrupted those plans through its 7th of October attacks. And we've seen also Israel trying to integrate itself very firmly into the global fossil capitalism by pushing for itself to become a kind of an energy hub to export gas to the European Union. And those exploration licenses that we've seen in the first weeks of the genocide to companies like BP, Econ-normalization, and others to explore for gas in the East Med are part of that plan. So based on all what I just outlined, I strongly think that the Palestine liberation struggle is not merely a moral and human rights issue, but is fundamentally and essentially a struggle against US-led imperialism and global fossil capitalism. So there will be no climate justice without the dismantling of the deeply racist Zionist settler colony of Israel and without overthrowing the reactionary Gulf monarchies. Simply put, Palestine is a global front against colonialism, imperialism, global fossil capitalism, and white supremacy. That's why it is incumbent on all of us, from climate justice activists to anti-racist organizations and anti-imperialist agitators, to actively support Palestinians in their liberation struggle and uphold their inalienable right to resist with any means necessary. The task for us is so huge, but as Fanon once exhorted us to do, we must, out of relative obscurity, discover our mission, fulfill it or betray it. I hope we will fulfill it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Hamza. I'm glad this is being recorded because I feel like I need to listen to you say that like 5 times to understand like the richness of what you were saying. But I think one of the things that is, that thank you for bringing, and I think is also really throughout your book as well, is this understanding that we can't get climate justice, global climate justice, without understanding the situation in a lot of parts of the world, of course, but particularly the way that the fossil fuel industry and imperialism and multinational corporations are interplaying in this region in particular. And so, it's really, thank you for bringing that. And I think Manal is going to explore the concept of normalization and eco-normalization a little bit more. And this is new to me. I don't know about other people, so maybe a little explanation for us would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Kate and Hamza. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be part of this panel speaking about environmental injustice / justice in Palestine. So yeah, I'll talk about eco-normalization, which Hamza briefly touched on, and this is the topic of my contribution to dismantling green colonialism. And it was an attempt to understand Palestine as part of the wider dynamics within the Arab region, and how what is happening now in Palestine is enabled by these dynamics, like the ruling classes that Hamza talked about. And I discussed the concept of eco-normalization as this increasing phenomenon in the Arab region, especially after signing the Abraham Accords between Israel and a few normalizing Arab states like Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, and Morocco. And the Abraham Accords, just to briefly talk about the Abraham Accords, it's a US brokered normalization deal. So it includes the intervention of the US imperialism, and it's part of its interests in the region, which Hamza touched on. It was signed in 2020, and the deal seeks to formalize relations, already long-standing relations between Israel and these Arab states, to make them formal, but also to strengthen the ties between Israel and other countries that formalized their relations with Israel a long time ago, like Jordan in 1994 and Egypt in 1979. And after signing the Abraham Accords, one of the things that started emerging and emphasized in mainstream media, particularly in the US and also in Israel, is that this is an opportunity for us to collaborate and build a coalition of these countries in the region that are being hit by the climate crisis. So we need to do joint projects together in order to tackle the exacerbating climate crisis. So again, from the very beginning, it was portrayed as this necessary collaboration in order to deal with the climate emergency. But in fact, eco-normalization is again Israel's tool of using false environmentalism to greenwash its apartheid settler colonialism, to cover up its crimes against the Palestinian people and their ecosystems. It also seeks to entrench Israeli settler colonialism through financing its system of apartheid, through its companies that are now actively working in the Arab region and beyond. And also, eco-normalization, as Hamza mentioned, it's an attempt by Israel to become a water and energy power regionally and globally. And this is happening not only by focusing on renewable energy projects or water desalination projects, but also in strengthening Israel's fossil fuel industry. So it is one facet of the fossil fuel industry in the region. It's an attempt to maximize Israel's and these normalizing Arab states' profitability from fossil fuel by also diversifying, by extracting other resources, and in this case, it's renewable sources of energy that the Arab region is rich with. So that's what eco-normalization means. The thing is that eco-normalization is not something new. It didn't start in 2020. It started 30 years ago, actually, when particularly in the wake of the so-called peace process between Jordan and Israel, and also Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, which saw the creation of the Palestinian Authority. And at that time, in 1994, Eco-Peace Middle East, which was formerly known by the name Friends of the Earth Middle East, it was created as this like a civil society organization that brings the three parties together in order to do projects that address the issue of climate crisis, particularly the question of water. And Eco-Peace Middle East has been actively involved in eco-normalization projects after signing the Abraham Accords through its big project, the Green-Blue Deal. And this project, its vision, its goals informed some of the projects of eco-normalization. And I'll mention it as an example of how it seeks to reposition or strengthen the superior position of Israel in the region. And this project is called Project Prosperity. It's a twofold project. The first part of the project is called Prosperity Blue, and it is a water desalination project that seeks to export desalinated water from Israel to Jordan annually. And it's being portrayed as an attempt to help Jordan to tackle its water crisis as one of the poorest countries globally in water. But this project seeks to distract attention from the fact that Israel has been plundering Palestinian and Arab water resources. Israel drained the Jordan River, and it denies Jordan's share in the Yarmouk River. And these two rivers are the main sources of water for Jordan for like centuries. At the same time, Israel, through that, is trying to portray itself as a benevolent country and as a country that possesses the technology, unlike its Arab neighbors, because they are underdeveloped, they don't have the technology, they don't have the expertise, so also portraying itself as an environmental steward. And you could see that and notice that kind of greenwashing narrative that Israel has constructed through and is promoting through the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund, which Sophia will talk more about, always portrays Israel as this country in the region that made the desert bloom, that this region is an arid region. It's not efficiently utilized or used, but Israel, since its creation, managed to make this land efficient, and efficiency means profitability, and also managed to develop the technology to live in that dry region. But Arab countries are still behind, and this is why they need the expertise of Israel. So always Israel, through its narrative and through the Jewish National Fund, which portrays the ethnic cleansing of Palestine as an act of land redemption, rather than as a war crime and as an act of, and we might hear in the future, if they portraying things in Gaza after they settle down as they are trying, or build settlements, that they made the desert bloom after the huge genocide and ecocide. So one last thing that I wanted to mention, because I feel I'm running out of my time. One last thing that I wanted to mention is Prosperity Green, which is the other part of the project, and it is a project that seeks to help Israel to strengthen its energy power by building a solar plant in Jordan, a huge solar farm in Jordan. And the company that will run this project is Masdar. It's an Emirati company, a renewable energy, it's a state-owned company that is active in projects of eco-normalization. And the idea is that the energy that will be produced will be exported to Israel in order to operate the water desalination station, so that Israel wouldn't need to use its energy. And in this case, it will become like a strong energy power, or an energy hub. The things that this project and eco-normalization in general, it creates new dependencies. It perpetuates the old dependencies of Arab states on imperialist powers, but it also creates new dependencies, because it will not address or tackle Jordan's energy crisis. Jordan has been suffering from an energy crisis, and it imports 75% of its energy from external sources, including from Israel. It's even tied to a deal with Israel, like the gas deal for 15 years. And through that deal, part of the conditions of the agreement is that it cannot look for other sources of energy. Even if they want, they cannot look for other sources of energy, and they will be bound by this deal for 15 years. So in this case, eco-normalization is not about improving the situation in terms of energy and water in the Arab region. It's about maintaining Israel's position at the top of the hierarchy the capitalist and imperialist hierarchy in the Arab region. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Manal. Again, very rich. It made me think back to what I said at the start about this COP and how it was meant to be billed as this COP of finance and how it was going to be putting all this money into countries, particularly countries in the global south, to finance their own transitions. And actually, it's very convenient if countries are not able to finance their own transitions and they're reliant on these systems of imposed imperialism that just continues, whether it's fossil fuels or it's solar power or it's anything. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to Freya, who's going to talk a bit about the way that this applies in Scotland and how does our energy and our energy system contribute to this global system.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And it's really amazing to be on this panel with you guys, and I'm learning so much from everyone else on the panel as well. So I hope everyone else is as well. I'm Freya. I work for Friends of the Earth Scotland. A lot of the work I do is with the climate movement in Scotland, and I think that I can't really start talking about the links between Palestinian liberation and climate justice without talking about how those two movements are so connected, and even we have shared targets, we use the same tactics in a lot of ways. A lot of individual people and individual groups are involved in both of the movements, and that's not an accident. It's because they're so deeply connected at their roots. So I'm going to be, I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So Friends of the Earth Scotland is part of an international federation of organisations that work for climate and environmental justice all over the world. One of those members is Friends of the Earth Palestine, which Kate mentioned earlier, or they're also known as PENGON, it's an acronym. PENGON is made up of 15 different environmental groups across Gaza and the West Bank. For Friends of the Earth Palestine and for the Friends of the Earth network more generally, it's just impossible to imagine climate justice without Palestinian liberation. It would be impossible to imagine people living separately from the land that they're living on, or the air that they're breathing, the water that they're drinking, the food that they're growing. But this is exactly what the Israeli state has been trying to do to the people of Palestine for obviously many decades. Hamza already mentioned how Israel restricts water access to Gaza in a time where water is getting tighter and tighter due to the climate crisis. People are being forced to drink water that's rainwater that's contaminated by chemicals that Israeli weapons have released into the soil, sewage from the sewage networks that no longer work. Food insecurity is obviously really high due to Israel destroying farmable land. So it's really, really clear here that there can't be any climate justice on land that is occupied. PENGON has been working really hard to build resilience among communities to these kind of attacks. Moving on to the kind of work that I usually do, a lot of the work that I do is around fossil fuels and fossil fuel companies, particularly in Scotland, but obviously this is such a linked network across the world that we can't really think about it in one place without thinking about how it's connected to the rest of the world. And Palestine is a really extreme example of how the fossil fuel industry works in the rest of the world. I think Hamza already spoke about kind of the externalization of costs under capitalism. And this is exactly what's happening with both the genocide and the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. Both of these systems are using the same belief system to justify their actions. They're believing that some people can and must be sacrificed in order to continue business as usual, and they rely on creating these sacrifice zones. Fossil fuel companies do this a lot. They create these sacrifice zones, which are usually in the global south, or they're where marginalized people live, and they exploit these areas and these people to make as much profit as they can, and then they sell these products on the open market for as much profit as possible. This is this is happening all over the world, but it's happening very extremely in Palestine right now. And to make the link between the fossil fuel industry and the genocide in Palestine more concrete, Hamza's already talked about the massive emissions of war. And where there's emissions, there's profits for fossil fuel companies. So war is extremely profitable for these companies. They need a lot of energy to carry out these operations. They need jet fuel, they need diesel, they need crude oil. It's been described by energy embargo for Palestine. Fossil fuels have been described as the oxygen of Israel's militarism, which I think is a really good way of looking at it. And you can draw these links really easily back to companies that are based in the UK. For example, so we ran this event recently with Energy Embargo for Palestine and learned a lot from their work. It's really amazing. You should check it out if you haven't already. They've recently done some research about a pipeline called the BTC pipeline, which runs from Azerbaijan to Turkey. It's part owned by BP, which is a UK-based oil company. And 30% of the oil that Israel uses comes through that pipeline. So that's instant profits for BP. Energy Embargo for Palestine also argues that you can't separate oil that's used for civilian and for military purposes in a settler society like the Israeli state. The whole society is premised on ethnic cleansing, so it's impossible to, like, everything is complicit in this genocide. You see pictures of tanks filling up at civilian petrol stations, for example, which makes it really clear. There's even some oil companies that donate fuel to the IDF, like jet fuel and diesel. For example, the Delek Group, which a subsidiary of the Delek Group, Ithaca Energy, is a part owner of the Rosebank oil field in the North Sea, which there's been an amazing campaign against in Scotland and the rest of the UK. So yeah, it's not a new thing that energy generation is being used to justify Israeli land grabs and the genocide. And these examples are not unusual, they're not an anomaly, they're examples of the fossil fuel industry working exactly as it's intended to work. So when we challenge this premise that certain places and certain people are disposable, we're actually challenging this whole industry and this whole belief system, and we start to disrupt the conditions that allow these things to continue. So to bring us to some examples, in Scotland, a lot of fossil fuel companies and governments are continuing to commit to new fossil fuel developments here in Scotland and in the North Sea. And doing that now at this point that we're at, after these negotiations at COP29 and at the stage of the climate crisis, this locks us into this harmful system, and it keeps us reliant on these companies that we know are doing so much damage and on the international market that allows these companies to carry on selling their products. So for example, two energy companies in Scotland, SSE and Equinor, at the moment are trying to build a new gas burning power station in Peterhead, which is in the northeast of Scotland. What that will do, if that's approved, is keep up the demand for gas until 2059, when the power station's lifetime will be over. That's way beyond when we'll be extracting gas from the North Sea. It's going to run out sooner than that. And we should stop extracting it before it runs out anyway. If they carry on burning it there, we'll need to import LNG from other places. Some research recently that a group called Gastavists did has shown that in the last year, 8 ships carrying LNG from Israel have been sold to Europe, and 2 of those ships have gone to the UK. So it's quite likely that gas that's burned in Peterhead could come from Israel, and directly those profits could directly fund the genocide. The longer that we rely on gas, obviously, the longer we're locked into these high energy bills that we're seeing and this extractive and exploitative system. So the sooner we get off that, the better. So that's why we're trying to stop this power station before it gets built. And you can hear a bit more about that at our stall at the back if you're interested. So yeah, it's becoming increasingly clear that we can't trust these fossil fuel companies to lead a transition away from fossil fuels. They exist to extract fossil fuels and make profits from this. So we can't trust them to deliver us a just transition away from that. A transition that's led by the industry is just going to reproduce these neo-colonial relationships like we're seeing in Palestine at the moment with the Israeli state, grabbing more land for clean energy projects, and Manal was talking about eco-normalization. It's all connected. As long as this fossil fuel industry is involved, this is all we're going to get. So we can and we must refuse to accept this as something that's like a foregone conclusion. We need to make space to imagine that another kind of system might be possible. But it's like a big question, obviously, how we start this fight for a system that's completely different from anything that we know. But luckily, this work has already started to happen in some places. In Scotland, for example, we've done a lot of research with workers in the oil and gas industry here. We've worked to co-create some demands for a just transition that would center like workers' rights and not the profits of fossil fuel companies. And one of these demands is for publicly owned energy, so that would mean that the benefits of energy generation would go directly to communities and to people that work there, rather than just profits for the companies and the shareholders. And these things, it's all to do with just refusing to accept the way that it seems like things have always been, or that things are, and refusing to accept like these new projects, new extraction, new developments as inevitable, like what we've done with Rosebank. So Rosebank, it's been in court in the last couple of weeks, and it's pretty likely that we'll defeat it as a movement. And like people power has brought it to this stage, and it seemed like a massive task, but actually we've been chipping away at it, and like it can be done. So I guess both the movements for Palestinian liberation and for climate justice require us to tackle this culture of disposability and this idea of the sacrifice zone, which is so central to capitalism, and it allows both genocide and fossil fuel extraction to happen. And both of these things need us to radically rethink what is possible and to disrupt the current system. We can start by just believing that something else might be possible, and then starting the work towards it. So this is things like resisting individual fossil fuel projects and calling out companies for their complicity in genocide. So that's just what I wanted to end on. And if you wanted to hear anything else about the work that Friends of the Earth Scotland is doing on individual projects, you can speak to us at the back at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Freya. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Sophia. So we've heard a bit about what are the projects and the fossil fuel companies, etc., that are accessible here, places like BP, Peterhead, that we can see as kind of common targets and that we can take action on locally. And then we're going to hear from Sophia a bit about particularly the JNF and how that can be done around Palestine solidarity as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's really great to be here and to organise together Friends of the Earth Scotland this meeting, an opportunity actually to have this discussion. I think, as Hamza said, especially now, we need to find ways of working together across our sort of the common goals that we're working towards. My name's Sophia MacLeod. I'm convener of the National Executive Committee of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We've been around since 2000, since the start of the Second Intifada. One of our key priority campaigns is the Stop the JNF campaign. And before I sort of go into that, just a little bit about the JNF and who they are. It's been mentioned, and I'm sure you've heard about it, because I think over the past year there's been so much more information out there about all sorts of aspects of Israeli settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, etc. And certainly the JNF trumps when you talk about these things. As a very brief sort of overview of the JNF. The JNF was established in 1901 by the Zionist Congress, a meeting and a movement born in Europe. The JNF was established in order to acquire the land of Palestine. And it's worth knowing and noting, if you don't already know, that Palestine was not the first place that the Zionist movement considered to establish the Zionist homeland. They looked at parts of Kenya, I believe, South America. You know, there are other ideas, but they did settle on historic Palestine, and I think the sort of religious connections also helped with the narrative for the Zionist movement. So 1901 established in order to acquire the land. Pre-state, pre the establishment of the State of Israel, the JNF's role was exactly that. And that process included pressurizing the early Zionist settlers to push out Palestinian farmers from the land. The people who knew the land, who worked the land, who lived on the land. The JNF had a role in persuading some of the more idealistic, if you like, Zionist settlers to say, well, look, you've got the wrong idea here. The idea is for us to establish a state for Jews and Palestinians we need to remove from the land. Very much in the run-up to the Nakba, to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1947, 1948, the JNF played a role in pulling together what's called the village files. If you look at Ilan Pappé's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, he actually speaks about this and writes about this very well from the historic archive, what the JNF was involved in. And that was really inviting themselves, arriving at Palestinian villages, introducing themselves, Palestinians welcoming them with tea, not realizing at that stage what the project entailed. But the point of it was the JNF gathered information about every single Palestinian village, who the families were, the layout of the villages, the political parties, everything that they could gather. And that prepared the way for the Zionist militias in 47, 48 to clear as much of the Palestinian village as possible, in driving out Palestinians, in targeting the Palestinian resistance as well on the ground. Again, a very brief overview. Post-1948, again, they have a role, because once the Palestinians, over 750,000 Palestinians were driven out from their lands, became refugees, the UN passed the Refugee Right of Return resolution. The State of Israel, newly established, what they did very quickly was the bulk of that land of Palestinian refugees they put into the name of the JNF. So the JNF had a role in protecting that land. If you look at the JNF constitution, their purpose is to hold the land for all Jews, for Jews, and that land can never be sold on, can never be taken over by non-Jews, and they do this for, as they claim, for all Jews. So it takes it away, if you like, from the responsibility of the State of Israel to handing it over to a parastatal organization. And this is what the JNF became in the newly established State of Israel. As part of that process, they took part in the destruction of Palestinian villages. They're planted mainly European pine trees and over Palestinian villages. So it's this process of not only the destruction, but the erasure of the history and memory of Palestinians on that land and Palestinian lives. There's an organization, Israeli Palestinian organization called Zochrot, whose purpose is actually to raise awareness about this process, but also they go and educate Israelis and internationals. We've gone there ourselves to visit these villages, and you can see the traces of the building, the destroyed villages, even amongst the pine trees. You can see the cactus, plants there that indicates, that people live there. So forests and parks. So a lot of the JNF land that you see now, if you go on their website, and this is part of the, their claim to be an environmental organization. They established the forests, they established the parks, recreation parks, there's cycling, all sorts of wonderful recreational things that you can do in JNF parks and forests. And again, post-1967, the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan, actually the Syrian Golan, the JNF again has a role in that, whether that's financing reservoirs in occupied territories
or that, again, that tree planting process where land would be taken from Palestinians, the JNF would go there and plant the trees, and then the process, that it's part of the process of establishing the settlements. So they plant the trees, but then come back, cut down the trees, and build the settlements on the land. So that is their role. And if you look at, they are actually, until today, their purpose has never changed. From 1901 until today, the JNF continues to play that role, and I think even more so if you look at what's happening, the attempts to continue the ethnic cleansing and to remove Palestinians from the land. The JNF still has a very important role, and they describe themselves as supporting and pushing forward the 21st century Zionist pioneers. So they consider themselves to have a very important role in the state of Israel. And in Scotland and the UK, they also have a role. They have charity status here in Scotland, in the UK, and in over 50 countries. They have observer status at COP since 2007, I think, and they have a key role in the pro-Israel lobby in this country as well. So if you look at the Scottish Parliament here, we have the Building Bridges with Israel group. You just have to look that up, look at who's on that list. They are the core of the pro-Israel lobby here in Scotland, and the JNF are very much part of that. The previous chair of the JNF KKL Scotland is now the honorary consul for Israel in Scotland. So today they have charity status, they have political support, they play a part in pressurizing our political leaders as well. In terms of the Stop the JNF campaign, we had our first sort of founding meeting, if you like, in May 2009 at the Durban Review Conference, the UN conference in Geneva. And that was a meeting between Habitat International Coalition, Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and the international, the Palestinian BDS National Committee. For the BNC, the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the Stop the JNF campaign had, and I think still continues to have an important role, because I think at the time, especially post the call for BDS coming out, a lot of the discussion and focus was on the occupied territories. Whereas when you're talking about the JNF, you have to look at the history of the Zionist movement, the process of settler colonialism, the ethnic cleansing, the structures that they've set up until today. So it allows you to speak about not just the occupied territories, but the Palestinian refugees, the Nakba, Palestinians inside Israel, the right of return. So it allows us to have that conversation and to talk about what are the structures in place that enabled that and that continues to support that ongoing process of settler colonialism. In May 2010, we had our founding conference organizing meeting in Edinburgh. So those organizations with BNC, SPSC, IJAN, HIC, we called a meeting here to establish and put out the call for action. If you go on the stopthejnf.org website, you'll find information. There's a call for action. But essentially what we're aiming to do is what I've just said, to allow us to educate and highlight and expose Israel settler colonialism by looking at the JNF and their particular role and their very important role, but also because they have charity status here, it gives us our leverage, right? It gives us, and because of the political support that they certainly had more of then, and so it's to expose, to educate, and to get rid, of course, of the charity status, but also to work and campaign to get them, discredited in these other forums like COP. In terms of what we've achieved since our founding, we've achieved quite a lot over the years. And in Scotland, they used to have open fundraisers. So at the Hilton every year, they would invite a big speaker. They've had Bill Clinton, Ruby Wax, Michael Douglas, Goldie Hawn, and they'd put out a press release a few weeks before to tell everybody that they're having a big gala dinner at the Hilton. Big big protests over the years, as well as their midsummer golfing and shooting fundraisers, big protests there. They no longer today, and for many years, they haven't organized these open fundraisers. They may happen, but they don't tell anyone about it, either before or after. You'd have to work hard to find out if they had one. Also, and this happened around the time of Al-Araqib, the beginning of the demolition of the Bedouin village of Al-Araqib. Certainly other demolitions and threats of demolition of Bedouin villages continues until today. But this particular village, it was very prominent in the press, and Israel, I think by now, I don't know how many times Israel has demolished the village, but at the time it was like 50, 100, they kept going back. So there was a lot of press around that. And we campaigned around that issue as well, because the JNF was involved. JNF tractors were involved in the demolition of these villages. And when they destroyed the villages, they made way for an ambassador's forest, and it was the JNF forest. And this is, again, an interesting way in for us when it looks like JNF forests and parks, because they named them after Coretta Scott King. They named them after certain events. They've just announced in this past year a park in the name of Jewish South African anti-apartheid campaigners. So there's lots of different ways for us to look at this and say, wait a minute, and to reach out to certain audiences. So as a result of that, we worked to get an EDM, our early day motion at the Parliament. We got over 100 MPs to sign a motion, and David Cameron dropped them as as an honorary patron. The tradition had been that every time one of the three main political party leaders came into office, they pretty much automatically became an honorary patron of the JNF UK. It was like they get a letter and then they're on the list. Today, none of those parties are honorary patrons. And it was around that time when the new party leaders coming in refused, and David Cameron dropped them as well. We also have in Scotland, we have the STUC, Friends of the Earth Scotland, the Green Party in Scotland, also the Green Party in England and Wales all have, and it was quite a few years ago, but it's still there on the record, support for the Stop the JNF aims and of the campaign. So there's a way in for us there. And also this year, after many years of campaigning, activists and our partners in Canada has had some success. The charity status of the JNF in Canada has been revoked by the government. So that is really a significant success and something that we should be using here. I'll finish. I know I'm conscious of the time. So I guess it's to say we have had some success, and I think today even more so, the JNF as a target is really important and significant because it allows us to talk about all these things, and there is a direct means for us to challenge our charity regulator to strip them of their charity status. So look out for the website and for the SPSE website, because we've got some proposals and plans for the new year for us to launch into this, and hopefully we can work with Friends of the Earth Scotland as well on what we can do there together. On Plant a Tree then, again, the Plant a Tree campaign was launched in 2011, and this was together with the Stop the JNF campaign, with the Stop the Wall organization based in Palestine, with Middle East Children's Alliance as well, and IJAN, International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. And this was a project to establish links with Palestinian farmers on the ground who are resisting. So it's a grassroots, and it's an attempt to really reach out and to create links between communities here and communities in Palestine, but very specifically to support Palestinian farmers who are working to reclaim their land, to plant, to make sure And also, it's also about their traditional farming methods and supporting their own, development and ongoing use of that. So we raise money here in order to send back to Palestine, but it is very clearly a solidarity link up. We don't see it as we don't see the Palestinian cause as a charity issue. Very, very definitely not. It is what we've talked about here. It is about solidarity. It is about supporting resistance on the ground, and it's about connecting communities. So we're outreaching at the moment, for example, to farming communities here. There's all sorts of different opportunities because of the story that the JNF tells. We can reach out to anti-racists, we can reach out to environmentalists, there's all sorts, trade unionists. So the Plant a Tree project is that, and linking up in real time as well. It's not you send your money and we all feel nice. It's about how can we continue to support. And as we all understand and realize, especially right now, that increase in settler violence and push to get Palestinians out of the West Bank is even more important. So I'll finish there. I guess, again, to reiterate what others have said about how we need to be organized, and I think especially now to be working together across the different communities and campaigns across Scotland and beyond, because there is so much that we could be doing, and to be more focused in our work and therefore more impactful on our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And I think it's really helpful to, think about these things at the level of kind of how are these systems and kind of international structures contributing to all of this, and like what are the concrete targets that we can see and access here, and how can we take action? So I want to go to a break in a second, but I was wondering maybe first of all, if people want to just, because we've heard so much, if we take 5 minutes, if people want to turn to the people around them and kind of get rid of anything that's in your brain. So maybe think about what's been new to you today. What have you heard that has been kind of an interesting link? What's kind of on the top of your brain? And we'll have like 5 minutes, and then we'll have a short break, and then we're going to have the choir. So don't go anywhere. And also, if you've got questions, we'll come to that after the choir. It's a bit of a head break. Speak to your neighbours for a second. important to hear from
Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao di Palestine. Canula bella, Canula in Philip, Philip. Nakumakum, Nakumakum. Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao di Palestine. Nakumakum, Canula in Philip, Philip. Nakumakum. Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao di Palestine. Nakumakum, Kainan in Erik Dilwan. Thank you very much. We are Sahani, and this song, you probably know the song Bella Ciao, Italian song of resistance. And the words in Arabic was, we will sing freedom, we will sing justice and solidarity. So, and we will end the occupation. We're going to sing two more songs in Arabic. The next one is a song of, another song of resistance, this time in exile. It's called Hadiya Baha, a well-known Palestinian song. Arabic speakers, please do join in. And the translation of the first verse: Become, O sea, so long has been our absence. Take my blessing to the land of our upbringing, to the earth that raised our forebears. Hadiya Bahar Hadi, Hawa ma fiha bitna, Wadi Salami Wadi, Lil Ardi Rabitna, Lil Ardi Rabitna. Salim Salim Mawladi, Norbert Bayen Rishdani, Rayas Korishadi, Pia Shai Shatinitna, Pia Shai Shatinitna. Suddenly as I to me, Wala Halababuni, Bahayam Ranuri, Bishamshim Bim Hadidna, Bishamshim Bim Hadidna. Hadiya Bahar Hadi, Awal ma fi Rabitna, Wadi Salami Wadi, Lil Ardi Rabitna, Lil Ardi Rabitna. Another Palestinian song that we were taught in the West Bank as part of a demonstration against the occupation. Some young women taught us this one because we were singing songs in solidarity there. So it's called Big Tib, and we'll start with the chorus. Everyone can join in the chorus because it's la 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 la. La 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 la.
Thank you for that musical interlude. We have a bit of time for questions and discussion. Now, if the speakers want to come back, I've lost you all, that's Hamza. And maybe, I don't know, maybe take a seat in the front row and we can have a bit of a discussion. I definitely have some questions, but was there anything that came up in anyone's chats that you had then with the people around you that you wanted to ask or share with the room?
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about the Jewish National Fund and how strong the movement is in the UK to do something about that, apart from the plant a tree thing. Yeah, sorry. I haven't heard much about that before. So, thank you.
Maybe I'll take a couple and come back. So the question about the campaign around the JNF. Anyone else? Okay, maybe I'm going to ask mine as well, which is kind of a more general one, maybe particularly for Manal and Hamza, is when I was thinking about this event, I was thinking about how we've talked so much today about the way that these struggles are really linked, and I was thinking particularly about the way that the climate movement, particularly in the global north, hasn't been that great at working in a way that recognizes the root causes of the climate crisis, right? Colonialism, racism, imperialism. And I was thinking about the way that, I don't know if anyone read an article by Aaron Dussey Roy in The Pandemic, where she said the pandemic was a portal because it made us imagine a different way of being. We had no choice, but then it was necessary. And I was kind of thinking that this moment, as horrific as it is kind of doing that to the climate movement. And so I was kind of wondering if you had any reflections on that and what the kind of vision for change for I guess a more intersectional movement could be from this moment. Maybe we'll go to Sophia first and you can answer the JNF question specifically and then, oh, you've got one. Microphones everywhere.
Yeah. Should I sit? Should I stand? So the Stop the JNF campaign, I mean, we've been working over the years since we were established, and the work has varied. So it was focused certainly in Scotland in the early days on the fundraisers in Scotland. We have also we work with like other PSC, Palestine Solidarity Campaign branches, especially Sheffield PSC and IJAN, International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and others as well on the sort of Stop the JNF UK campaign, if you like. And we've challenged the charity status a few times, I think 3 times now over the years, as well as challenged the status with Oscar, with the Scottish regulator. I mean, it's the nature of it, you know, even though right from the start, one of our aims is to strip the charity status, sometimes, and it has been the case, where if you just focus on that, it's a wee bit of a rabbit hole, because the charity status reflects the establishment, position, if you like. You know, there's been attacks on charities like War and Want, for example, a campaigning organization, but also a registered charity for their campaigning and political work. And War and Want has been very good at pushing back on that. And there's been attacks on Palestinian and pro-Palestine organizations as well that has charity status. So it's been useful and we've learned a lot from it, but it's not something that I think we have to be careful about that. Now, that has all changed. So over the past year, we've all been focused on the genocide, on mobilizing, so we haven't done actually very much. But we have sort of reconvened, and we have a plan for the coming year, which includes the challenge to Oscar and the Charity Commission. So yeah, you're very welcome to get involved. We very much need you. And there's lots of different aspects because we have a plan in terms of outreach to different constituencies, different audiences. And I guess just to briefly answer your point, I think especially now, it's really important. I mean, as somebody in an organization that's been involved in Palestine solidarity campaigning for over 20 years, you know, it's gone through a whole, due to Palestinian resistance, to be honest, and to Israel's attacks and massacres over the years, and the Palestinian resistance to that, that's when we see the spike in interest and the demonstrations and people coming out. But today we have a lot of opportunities. It's gone beyond anything that I think anyone has imagined. And really it's up to us now in terms of how we organize, not that we must organize, and then sometimes you have to argue that as well, right? We must be organized. It can't be taken as a given, but it's also about how we organize. And I think especially now, it's really important for us to find and work together as allies. There's all sorts of different organizations that focus on all sorts of different things. And as Hamza highlighted, Palestine is that portal to understanding, yes, Israel, yes, Palestine, the history of the Zionist movement, but actually it reflects back our own regimes and our own structures. So how can we do that with environmental justice movements, with anti-racist movements? It's possible, and I think as somebody who's been around for a while, I think sometimes there's bad habits that we all have to break in terms of how we approach each other and how we have these conversations between each other from established organizations, but there's also a whole layer of new organizations and campaign groups and individuals who are interested in being involved. So I think I would say, let's get together and talk about that, right, in a different way, because there have been hurdles, real hurdles as to what was possible. So I think, how do we put that into action? I think let's have those actual conversations that may be difficult, but is a start.
So I guess what I tried to do in my talk or in my presentation is to show that Palestine cannot be just seen as a human rights or moral issue. It concentrates all the contradictions of the system we live under. So Palestine, in a way, becomes also a struggle against wars, against genocides, against militarism, against the climate injustices, against fascism. And also it shows the way that how people in the midst of all the catastrophes continue to resist. And you're right, we need to continue organizing in times of catastrophe of climate crisis, catastrophes of wars and genocides, catastrophes of moving towards a fascist world. We are seeing how fascism is becoming, creeping all over Europe, and with the Trump, winning, that's gonna get really worse. So, like, from my experience, I've seen, there were a lot of blind spots in the climate justice movement in the last 20 years, but I think there has been improvements too. A lot of the groups that I know in the global north have taken the analysis on white supremacy, racism, colonialism seriously, perspective from the indigenous communities, but that's not enough. There is more work to be done. What matters is how do we create those connections between various struggles. If we cannot just be a single issue struggle, just work on the climate or the food systems or the energy or militarism or gender issues or no. We are fighting one system, and our way of organizing and analyzing must be anti-systemic. But at the same time, we cannot also organize just at a local level. It's very important to organize at a local level. That's where it starts, at a national level, but it needs to go beyond that, to the regional level, to the international level. So we need to think global and act global. We need to keep organizing. There is no other way. And we cannot think about those issues in individual ways, because that's how neoliberalism fragmented us. Just make us think about those issues in an individual way, and then say, wow, the task is so huge, we cannot really resolve it. No,
If we look back at the history, especially the history of anti-colonial struggles, people came together, organized collectively. They created movements, they created revolutionary parties, and it takes a long time. So that's why we need to keep organizing at every level, and joining organizations who are doing the work. That's really important.
Thank you. I agree with all what Hamza said. There has been an improvement, but I think there still needs to be more space, or I think climate movements in the global north needs to listen more to the concerns of people in the global south, including Palestine in this case, and also not to envisage one model of climate justice. Climate justice is context specific, so we cannot impose the global north, model of climate justice or tackling the climate crisis on other countries in the global south. It's gender specific. It's also related to the struggles of people in the global south, which are different. It's not one struggle. Another thing is that let's not also to focus on not assuming that just because decision making and resources are concentrated in the global north, that they also possess kind of environmental stewardship, that the idea that they want to teach or impose their own views, as I said, on the global south. Another issue related to Palestine and the climate movement in the north is that there hasn't been that much coordination between groups that are working in solidarity with Palestine and the climate justice movement in the global north, and also with trade unions. I think the urgency of the situation in Palestine should compel us, or these groups, climate groups in the global north, to build more alliances with other groups and form a kind of a coalition in order to support Palestine more effectively, but also in order to fight back against attempts to intimidate people who are organizing for Palestine through like anti-Semitism and other mechanisms of silencing people who are taking action in solidarity with Palestine. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Manal. And we were just talking at the start about the way that policing is one of the ways in which people who are taking action against the fossil fuel industry and people who are taking action against the arms industry are being policed, dragged through the courts, imprisoned. Like this is, yeah. Is there any other questions or comments that anybody wants to? I don't believe that after all of that information, you're like, I get it. Yeah.
Hi, it's just a question for Manal again. You talked about a term that I'd not heard before, this notion of eco-normalization. I just wonder if you could say a bit more, just because I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean by that.
So first, normalization, as we define it, as the Palestinian BDS movement, and even before the BDS movement, as we always in Palestine define it, normalization between Arab states or even between Palestinians as individuals or certain groups and Israel is to normalize and naturalize the occupation. And in this sense, it means to stop resisting it and dealing with it as something normal. And that's where the danger of normalization lies. Now, eco-normalization is using environmentalism, using green tactics of colonialism that Israel has been using for decades in order to strengthen the ties between Israel and Arab states, like through working on projects related to water, projects related to renewable energy. And in this case, Israel through that seeks to achieve more than one goal. It's not just about making money and making profit. It's also about strengthening the diplomatic ties between these countries and Israel, especially if these, which is the case, if the Arab states are always in a subordinate position in relation to Israel when it comes to projects of Econ-normalization, so that maintains their dependency on Israel and make Israel as an indispensable partner in relation to the climate crisis, which is exacerbating in the Arab region. Yeah, I hope that's a clear answer.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, I will actually hand back to Manal for some closing words. You look like that's confusing, but we agreed that, right? Yeah. And then after that, the stalls will be open for a while longer. So there's the Friends of the Earth stall with information about all the campaigns Freya talked about. And there's the Scottish Palestine Solidarity campaign with the SPSC campaigns and the Stop the JNF campaigns information, as well as, are there any books left? There's some books left. So you can grab a copy of that as well. And yeah, good point. We'll come to that. Yeah, and it was great to have you all here for this afternoon. And I will pass over to Manal for some closing words.
Thank you, Kate. Just to sum up, which is hard to sum up after hearing like all these great speeches. Yeah, after, stand up. Yeah. I thought you were saying, raise your voice. Okay, so yeah, just to sum up, what I wanted to say is that Israel, since its establishment, has been using environmentalism to dispossess and ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. And I mean, colonialism everywhere, and colonialism in the Arab region, in this case, Israel, they've done so through degrading the environment of the indigenous people, through treating it as inferior, that needs development. And in this case, development is realized through colonialism. And that's something that the book, Dismantling Green Colonialism, discusses through the idea of Oriental, what is it? Environmental Orientalism discusses that that phenomenon and these, like the operation of colonialism through the use of a green garb to cover up the whole kind of oppressive colonial regimes, but also to give legitimacy, because colonial powers also need legitimacy to justify what they are doing. And Israel has been always trying to look for legitimacy for its existence as an apartheid settler colonial state, regionally, but also globally. And again, as I mentioned minutes ago, it's to always portray itself as indispensable. And Israel does so through always positioning itself in as superior to its neighbors, to other countries in the global south, which are inferior, underdeveloped. Just to mention quickly something that made me actually ironically laugh. Last week, Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in a video addressing the Iranian people and talking to them how much money the attack the latest attack that Iran launched on Israel cost Iran, while Iran is claiming that it doesn't have money to improve the economic situation of Iranians. And he mentioned something about, like, your water infrastructure is horrible. Your regime is not really caring about your water infrastructure. And if you overthrow that regime, we'll make sure that we improve the water situation in Iran, because Israel has a water desalination technology. And we can help you through that technology to improve the water situation in Iran. So he's even using it now, and Netanyahu is the same person who, for the last 14 months, has totally destroyed the water infrastructure in Gaza, which was already like bad before even the war started. And he's heading the same regime that has been practicing water apartheid against the Palestinian people. But it just shows how Israel is using these as tools in order to show, like, if you are not our allies, you are losers, you know, because we have things that you don't have. One last thing to mention about the JNF and also the companies here. in Scotland, but also in the UK and the global north at large, and the Jewish National Fund. What this tells us is that colonial institutions that are enabling Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine exist here. They are in the imperial core. And it also tells us that we cannot liberate Palestine without dismantling these institutions. So you have a fight on a different front, which is part of the Palestinian fight for liberation. There is responsibility, but that's important, and we need to always keep that in mind if you want to do really effective solidarity with Palestine. You've been already doing a lot of work since the war started, but we need to triple that work and not give up until these institutions and these companies are held accountable or stop being complicit with Israel. And what recently happened in Canada, where the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund has been revoked, should be an inspiration, and that activism works indeed. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say a few last words. First of all, thanks for the organizers, Friends of the Earth Scotland and Scotland Palestine Solidarity Campaign, for hosting this brilliant conversation. I'm not gonna bore you with more of my thoughts. I'm gonna share two quotes with you. I think they are powerful quotes. One by the Palestinian revolutionary thinker Ghassan Kanafani, and another one by my favorite eco-Marxist, Andreas Malm. So I'll start with Ghassan Kanafani. He says, imperialism has led its body over the world, the head in Eastern Asia, the heart in the Middle East, its arteries reaching Africa and Latin America. Wherever you strike it, you damage it, and you serve the world revolution. And then Andreas Malm quote about the intersections between the Palestinian resistance and the climate crisis. So he says, what can the climate front learn from Palestinian resistance? It's that even when the catastrophe is consummated, all pervasive, omnipresent, and unrelenting, we keep resisting. Even when it's too late, when everything has been lost, when the land has been destroyed, we rise out of the rubble and fight back. We do not yield, we do not surrender. We do not give up because Palestinians do not die. Palestinians will never be defeated. The continuation of the Palestinian resistance in itself would be a victory, because we're going to continue fighting no matter the catastrophes you pour on us. This is a source of inspiration for the climate front. In this respect, the Palestinians do not only fight for themselves, they fight for humanity as a whole, for the idea of humanity that resists catastrophe in whatever shape or form, and which keeps going despite overwhelming superior forces on the other side. I think there are all sorts of reasons to stand in solidarity with Palestinian resistance for their own sake, but also for our own. Thank you.